Good afternoon, Professor Father Matthew Chandrankunal. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation to give an interview. You are a Catholic priest, a philosopher, a scientist, and an organizer at the same time. You wrote many books on philosophy of physics. You are the head of the Ecumenical Center in Bangalore, India. 2 years ago, you came in Minsk. To Minsk, you gave a talk on science, philosophy, and religion at our Institute of Philosophy. This is how cooperation between the Ecumenical Center in Bangalore and the Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Sciences of Belarus was established. So, please, could you tell a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where and what you studied, how you became a Catholic priest, etc. So.
Dr. Francois Igor Pris, I am extremely happy that we met in Belarus, Minsk, 2018. And I am extremely happy that we could collaborate. Some years ago, I think we started writing to each other. I remember that in Darmstadt, I was about to come and meet you, but unfortunately, we couldn't meet. But it was extremely happy that we were capable of interacting in Minsk, and you are a generous host, and you took me around the different places. And as I told you that I have seen in Belgium, in Brussels, there were trains moving from Brussels to Minsk. So I have seen this. And then in Bangalore, we have a Minsk Square. So I was always fascinated by where is this Minsk, because Bangalore became a partner city of Minsk. And then we have the Minsk Square. And then you have taken me and showed that there is also a Bangalore Square. So that was an incredible way of interacting with the Belarus culture, Belarus country, in and through you. And I remember gratefully the Academy of Belarus Academy of Sciences, the Institute of Philosophy, where I gave the lecture. Lots of people were there. It was a fantastic experience. So this collaboration between Dr. Francois Igor Pris and Professor Dr. Matthew Chandrankunal, CMI, I think it became a meeting ground between two cultures, two cities, and two civilizations. And fantastic that we could interact, meet, and also collaborate. And your question about me as a Catholic priest and also into science, I must say that I am born and brought up in a village named Tikoi, that is in Kerala. And I studied in various other places. My schooling is from Tikoi. And I used to be an altar boy, where I go for mass every day. And then as I was going, maybe 4 o'clock in the early morning, sometimes very early, even the church would not have been opened, and I would see the wonderful stars in the sky. And that enabled me to integrate in a way my scientific pursuit and also my religious pursuit. After my schooling, I have also an uncle who was a Catholic priest. I have seen him coming, and he died 8 years ago. So he was a psychologist. So I could see that how in a scientific way he was trying to help people. So, and becoming an altar boy, assisting in the masses, that enabled me to pursue both the scientific pursuits as well as the religious pursuits. So I found a complementarity, and I was ordained as a Catholic priest in 1987 after studies of physics. And I have a practical training as a journalist. Then theology, philosophy, I studied in Dharmaram Vidya Kshetram, and I was after 1998 almost till 2016 I was a professor of physics, philosophy, science, religion, philosophy of science there. Then I had the opportunity to study physics, masters, then also for my PhD in quantum mechanics at the University of Leuven, Belgium. My superiors told me that you could go and study philosophy of science, and my favorite subject was quantum mechanics. So I always took professors who were capable of taking my pursuits. So there was a Professor Rulands, with whom he was the professor of philosophy of science. So I interacted with him, and then he told me that he did not know much about David Bohm. I want to know through your thesis what David Bohm did. And he was a mathematician, and he introduced another professor from physics. He is Professor Paul Doge, who was a collaborator with Roger Penrose. And I had a wonderful time in interacting with them. Even Paul Doge used to work with Penrose on nonlinear problems. So my studies there helped me to go deeper and deeper into the quantum mechanics. I had the great privilege of interacting with Friedrich von Weizsäcker, who was the former director of Max Planck Munich, and he sent me his articles. And I was fortunate also to Åborg at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. And I found there was also Ilya Prigogine, who received Nobel Prize in chemistry, I think, and also order and disorder. So all these people in front of them, I found they were making me great. If I ask them questions, they are capable of sending me articles and interacting. So I found in them a humility, a wonder, curiosity in knowing, and that enabled me. I also had the opportunity to study at Harvard University under Owen Gingerich, who was an astronomer, who was also a philosopher of science, historian of science, and the great opportunity to, I would say that I did not have a photograph of that. He showed me the book written by Copernicus. That book was, I think, in 1643, which Copernicus wrote, and he showed me, and I had the opportunity to take it into my hands. It was in Latin. Also, he showed me the other books of Galileo, and we were reading through the Latin, and he asked, so I was thinking Galileo was a deacon or a Catholic priest, but he challenged me. You prove that, he is a Catholic priest. So when that enabled me to go into deeper and deeper, and I found that he was not ordained as a Catholic priest or a deacon, but I think in one of the minor orders, because he used to get some scholarships. So that way I had the opportunity to study into the great institutes where the physics and also the philosophy, and these were really the wonderful way of grooming me. And as you know, I was also a Catholic priest, so I could study both the physics and the philosophy and theology, and I found that there is the possibility of integrating all of them. And I must also say that I received in 2000 the Templeton CTNS award. That also enabled me to be in US for several times, and also the local society initiative, by which we had plenty of interactions with scientists, philosophers, theologians from all over the world. So that was, in a way, I must say that my grooming into this intellectual world, and also to collaborate with various institutions of reputed learning and great men and women in physics, science, and other fields.
Excellent. Excellent education, excellent studies, research, fantastic. But let us start with the question of the religious faith. I recently interviewed Timothy Williamson, a famous British philosopher. He thinks that most religious beliefs are false. He's an atheist. And young Paul Dirac, he was about 25 years old. Once he said that if we are honest, and scientists have to be, we must admit that religion is a jumble of false assertions with no basis in reality. The very idea of God is a product of the human imagination. Niels Bohr, also one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, said, I feel very much like Dirac. The idea of a personal God is foreign to me. So are philosophy and science on the one hand and religion on the other hand in conflict, or maybe they complement each other?
Fantastic question, Dr. Francois. Yes, while I was in Copenhagen, I visited the tomb of Niels Bohr. I have seen that there are an owl, because it looks like, waiting or during the night, searching for the truth. I have written as a research the physics, philosophy, and theology of Galileo Galilei under the tutorship of Professor Owen Gingrich. There, Galileo, we could say that the father of modern science. And for him, what is science? Science is the search for truth. And he said that it is an ascent to truth. So his science was, in a way, an ascent to truth. And we also see that, Copernicus, he was looking up into the sky, and during the night he was meditating. And Matejk, I think he was one of the great artists from Poland. He made a paint that, it is a kind of an encounter, a mystical encounter by Copernicus, looking up into the sky. And we see that, how we discovered. And also we must see that how Copernicus came into this great vision. There were from the Aristotelian geocentric cosmosophy, that is philosophy and science together, which was by Ptolemy. It was integrated into mathematical, and which was prevalent till the modernity. And it was the Islamic scholars, because they needed to find where is Mecca. And so they were looking about, and then they found the problems with the Aristotelian Ptolemaic system. They have amalgamated all the problems, and someone like Al-Tusi, so he almost made that, but none of them made that, we have to change the geocentric. It was Copernicus who found, when he found that, the sun, you can take it, which is from the periphery, put it in the middle, then there is explanations, and which will solve many of the problems. So how the modern science began? It began on knees, on meditation, and a belief in God, and God as the truth, and scientific pursuit. Galileo, that mathematics and experiments, he only integrated them, and he was that visionary, which we could see that, Newton, Kepler, and then many others were there. But we also see that the seeds were also sown by, there were scientists, Laplace. He wrote Le Celestial Mechanic, that book, and then asked Napoleon to release the book. And Napoleon simply went through the book and said, Monsieur Laplace, I did not find the name of God there. Then retorted Laplace that, I don't want that hypothesis in order to explain. So then we see that in our contemporary times, Dawkins, Hawking, and many other scientists, they were all saying that, as proposed by Auguste Comte, that we have a religious phase, then a metaphysical phase, and then we have the scientific phase. So the religious phase should be eliminated by the metaphysical or the philosophical phase, and then we have the scientific phase, and that is where we are now, and all other should be. But I have, Francois, only one question. We have the euphoria about the whole discovery of science, the power of science and technology. We have conquered, we went to the moon and everything. But why our borders are closed? Why we cannot get out of our room? One small little virus that has blocked us. Why we are unable to? Thousands and thousands of people were dying. Where was our euphoria about science and technology? I saw a joke that, two gorillas were laughing at, and they were claiming that, in the 2020, humans were saying that we will walk in Mars. Unfortunately, they could not get out of their rooms. So there is a limit to our science and technology. And this has been shown by this small virus. So therefore, I must say that, and nobody is now speaking about the claims of science and technology. We are shown by a little virus that we are not a huge way of controlling, manipulating the universe. And there are limits to our own reason, our own power, and they have taught us the humility. So therefore, I must say that there is something superior intelligence. Many scientists, one Professor Padmanabha, who was the director of Indian Institute of Science, one of the very prominent in India, he told me that, you may call it as God, but I may call it as super intelligence. That is the protein synthesis the science cannot explain. And then I remember that the US, one of the scientists, Woloshek, when she was giving classes to us, she said that when I look into the cell, I find mystery. And you can also see that Francis Collins, who also received a Nobel Prize, and he said that God's God. True, that God delusion and God's design. So many books are there who will be denying and negating the presence of God. But there are many other scientists who are also claiming that it is a super intelligence is there. And I also, from that perspective, my science, little knowledge will show that there is no God. But when you are looking into the mysterious universe, even into the atom, into the cell, into the functioning of the human body, or even into any cell, it will show to us that it is a mystery. There is a mystery. There is a creator behind it. There is a divine spirit which has initiated everything. So therefore, I believe that there are people who will be claiming, but it is on the knees this science has developed, and still there are many scientists who are continuing on it. So we cannot simply deny that there is a materialistic outlook, and if you are simply blind with that, you will not be seeing the power and the majesty and the glory and the might of the divine spirit.
Okay, thank you. Father Matthew, for Niels Bohr, I refer again to the great physicist. Religion uses language in quite a different way from science. Bohr thinks that the language of religion is more closely related to the language of poetry than to the language of science. So religions speak in images, parables, paradoxes, and for Bohr, this means that there are no other ways of grasping the reality to which they refer. But that does not mean that it is not a genuine reality. So, do you think that all religious beliefs are literally true? Do you, for example, literally believe in an afterlife? Do you literally believe that there is an immortal soul? By the way, what major religions do exist in India?
Well, I must answer to you from the Bohr's perspective first. You see, what is the greatest contribution of Niels Bohr? Principle of complementarity.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it say? Principle of complementarity says that you have a particle and you have a wave, and depending upon the experimental setup, you will be getting the result either as particle or wave, and these two together comprehensively give the reality. Why didn't he say that there is only one reality, it is a wave, and there is only a particle? And what was Einstein telling him? God doesn't play dice. So, and then what is the symbol? The symbol of yin and yang, which shows that, there are two realities. When one reality is at the top, then the seed of the next one is inside there, and it emerges into that. So he accepted that there are more realities, more than one. So by that itself, I would say that religion and science, they are complementary. So even unknowingly in his unconscious, Bohr might have been influenced by that, and that is what came through this principle of complementarity. So this is my answer to your question on Bohr and the others and the truth. But sorry, I must say that from the very beginning onwards, the Indian culture is more spiritual. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is a beautiful poem. Asatoma sadgamaya tamasoma jyotirgamaya mrutyorma amrutam gamaya. The meaning is that, O Lord, lead us from non-existence to existence, from darkness or ignorance to wisdom and light, and from death to eternity. So that is from the very beginning onwards. So from the Indian culture, you could see this is the underpinning principle, that there is a spiritual dimension. And we have so many, the Vedas, Upanishads, and in all those, they will be saying the questions. There is also Kathopanishad, I think there is the question of Nachiketas. Nachiketas want to know what is beyond death. So therefore, he is going and meeting the god of death. And he was persistent, and he got the answer. So we could see that, the principle of arguing, searching, finding is in the Indian culture. So therefore, we have Hinduism, which many say that it is a culture rather than a religion. Then a kind of renaissance in Hinduism that came as Buddhism. Then we also have a more ascetic one, that is Jainism. Then there is also Sikhism. So these are some of the religions which emerged from India. So all these religions, they have their own scriptures. I know very well Hinduism. When we were studying philosophy, we study the philosophical Shat Darshana, 6 philosophical systems. Then also the great books. Then also the ethical pursuits. So this we really study, and I could find the enrichment of all this. And then we also see that Lord Buddha, how he was renouncing. So we could see that he was in the palace, he was in affluence, and then he found the questions: death, sickness, old age, the change that is happening. And then he wanted to find. Then he became a monk, and he was an ascetic, and then he became almost skinny, a skeleton. And then he found that these two paths, one is a very affluent life he had, and then a very ascetical path. Then he found that I have to find what is the reality. Then he sat and meditated, and he found the middle way. So that middle way is that, Sarvam Dukhamaya, there is the dukkha, or there is pain, suffering, and it is caused by our desire. There is an eightfold path that you can remove, and basing on that, we have the great philosophical traditions, and we have the Nalanda University, Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramashila, which in the 5th century, 10,000 students. And I have visited almost 6 times there, and the philosophical richness. And His Holiness Dalai Lama asked me to go and teach them. So I taught the Buddhist monks. They taught me meditation, and I found that how enriched I am. I'm a Catholic priest teaching the Buddhist monks, learning from them the meditative processes. So that way I found the beauty of that. I also have friends from the ascetic tradition of Jainism. This is also the Tirthankaras, 24 Tirthankaras, and there is the one of the most important person. So he showed how we have to keep an ascetical life, how he should conquer. That is Mahavira. So he is the founder of the religion of Jainism. Then we have Buddhism. We have Sikhism. Sikhism is of the 16th Guru Nanak. It was a mix of Hinduism and Islam. They have the book. They have 10 gurus. The last, after the last guru, is that the book. So therefore, they call it as Guru Granth Sahib. As a person, they sang beautiful chanting. I have gone also to many times to the Sikh Gurudwaras. And then we also have Judaism, who came to India. And then Saint Thomas came in search of them. Christianity in the 1st century. Then later in the 7th century, the Islam came. Then because of the persecution in Iran, the Parsis also came. And there is a beautiful message given by the Parsis. The king in Gujarat, sorry, the king in Gujarat, when they came by a boat, a country boat, then they asked asylum in the Gujarati king. Then the king sent a bowl filled up with milk. And then what happened? Showing that, there is no space. And then the Parsis, what they did? They took some sugar and put it into it. It melted. So then the king accepted, and the Parsis They are great industrialists, great musicians, great actors. So small. So that way, all these religious traditions in India, they behave as a kind of a matrix. So the underpinning spiritual tradition, they all came, and then we have a kind of integrated life. And quite often we have this, we don't say that, it is a communal tolerance, but it is communal harmony. But I must also say that there will be conflict here and there, because instigated by the political leaders for having political power. Otherwise, Indian culture is a great absorbent. It absorbs everything what is nice and everything what is good. And then we could say that India is transformed because of all these religious traditions.
Okay, thank you. Father Matthew, you are a Catholic priest. So what and how must one believe to be a true Christian?
The Catholic priest, and you are asking me that which is true in the Christianity, or?
Yeah, what and how must one believe to be a true Christian?
Well, see, we have Jesus Christ, and the apostles or the disciples were there. They all thought that, he will bring an external kingdom, but only after crucifixion, death, and resurrection, they found that it is a spiritual kingdom. And then that transformation happened to them, which is revealed through their experiences in the Gospels and that of Paul and the others in the epistles. So that shows Jesus as the Son of God, who came to as God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and he reinterpreted religion in terms of Good Samaritan, and he broken his body and given to the humanity, and that has been continued through the Christian tradition. Unfortunately, various conflicts. I think the first millennium there is conflict with the Catholic Church. The Orthodox Church is separated away, and then in the 15th, 16th centuries, the Protestant Revolution, and there is again the Western conflict. Then again you see that several. So we don't know exactly how many Christian communities are there. So there are splitting, but still the largest Christian community, I think it is the Catholic Church. And today Pope Francis is the leader, and I am highly appreciating Pope Francis. He's an embodiment of love, compassion, simplicity, and the way he is guiding the Catholic Church, and then as a moral person, showing to the whole world how we need to conduct the traditions. So I think that way Catholic Church for me is something very fascinating. And I as a Catholic priest, I have also with now I am the director of the Ecumenical Christian Center. We have so many Christian denominations who are part of this. Almost 24 different Christian denominations are part of the system, and also we conduct the interfaith dialogue and so many other things. So I am not a person who is able to tell that this is right, that is wrong. So instead of that, I could very well say that truth is everywhere, and this truth can be experienced in many different ways, and truth is not reserved to any particular religion or Christian denomination. God is only one. Pope Francis used to say that, there is no Catholic God, there is no Christian God, and there is only one God. And I think that that will help us to believe that the religious experiences, but to some extent, we will be able to say that the revelation given by God to us is also something which enables, so that there is in the different religious traditions, they were trying to find answers and the rational way of understanding. Then there is also the revelation, that is also. So this is what, from reason and faith. So we have to accept these two as the two wings of the human spirit that enables us to rise to the divine. Second Vatican Council used to say in Nostra Aetate that we all are the humans. We are moving towards the divine. And we are in a process, and I believe in that. And nobody has the consolidation of the whole deposit of truth. So we are in the process of knowing, and we need always the other religion, and we are called to witness the life and death and resurrection of Christ Jesus.
Okay, thank you. So all religions are equal. You don't believe that the Catholic religion is truer than other religions?
That is a very difficult question. You asked me.
What do you think about Islam, for example?
Well, I think in the very beginning, I told you about Islam, that from the 8th century till the 12th century, we could see that they are in the forefront of knowledge, teaching. In 1889, I think, or 1899, they are in Fez in Morocco, the first university by a woman, Al-Qur'anain, I think, that is the university, and the great masters of knowledge. Even from India, they have collected information, books, and the Book of Wisdom in Baghdad, where Al-Mansur kings, they have collected all the books. You know what is algorithm? There is an Indian Bhaskaracharya. He wrote Bijaganida, Leelavadi, all mathematical treatises on trigonometry, that has been translated into Arabic by Al-Khwarizmi from Bukhara, and the title was Al-Jabbar. And this Al-Jabbar was translated into Latin. Then we got algebra. So we also say that it was the Islam enabled us translating many of the books of Aristotle into Arabic and then into Latin. So that knowledge transmission, transformation was by the Islam. So I have been quite often invited by Muslim leaders and communities. So I told them that is the glory of Islam. So they need to rediscover that path of knowledge, the path of rationality. But it looks like that from the 11th century, there is some religious leaders who said that if we are pursuing rationality and science, we will be away from the Creator. And this has been pursued later in the Al-Ghazali, I think, in the 12th century, 13th, 14th centuries, Ibn Taymiyyah, and then in the 18th, 19th century, we have Ibn Wahhab. So they pursued a different way of moving away from the rationality, and it was true faith. We have great Nobel Prize winners like Abdul Salam from Islam, but moving away from rationality, I think that might have misled them. They have to bring back into this rationality and the faith together, so that balancing would enable them to rediscover the great glory of Islam.
Okay, thank you. So can we summarize what is religion? What is the difference between religion and science?
Well, it can be debated long for many hours, but in a very short way, we could say that religion is a meaning-giving mechanism, and science technology is a life facilitating mechanism. So science and technology enables us to encounter the environment and to facilitate us to have a better life through the gadgets, and also the knowledge we through these different experiences or the experiments, and the principles driven from there in order to predict events, phenomena. So that is the process of science. But science has also an inherent inbuilt basic flaw. It can only see what is observable. What is unobservable, they will not be able to. So that way, I think it is the weakness of science. But on the other hand, religion is giving us meaning. Even though people are having a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of knowledge, position, but if they don't have a meaning, that is Viktor Frankl and other psychologists would be saying that, so it is only the meaning that can, even St. Augustine used to say that, what can drive us? What can completely quench our thirst? It is only the divine. No material reality can completely quench our thirst. So that is like that, we have so many great intellectuals who would be capable of giving answers to something beyond us, something transcending us, and religion is that enabling us. So like Sir John Templeton, who found that this science and religion, they are not in conflict, but they are complementary. And I believe that this complementary approach will enable us, our present civilization, the human civilization, to fight against poverty, hunger, diseases, illiteracy, and enables us progress. If you look into the earlier centuries, you will see that great monasteries, great churches, great temples, great mosques, great viharas. So all these religious traditions, technologically, they have developed, artistically, aesthetically. So both religious phenomenon and the scientific phenomenon, experience and the experiment, they have really contributed for the development of humanity. So if we are capable of integrating, there is the possibility of quantum leaps can be made by our present civilization.
Okay, thank you. It's clear. So, Father Matthew, you are the director of the Ecumenical Center in Bangalore, India. So, could you tell a little bit about the center? What are its objectives, achievements, and so on?
Well, this is the personal project of a Mar Thoma priest, one of the Saint Thomas Christian who into we have split into different Christian denominations. So in that one priest from the Marthoma tradition, Reverend Dr. M.A. Thomas. So he was the visionary. This visionary person thought that there should be a place where every human being, irrespective of caste, creed, geography, gender, they could come and meet together. So in 1963, he had that vision, but he was also a true Christian. And it seems that he had an experience that while he was studying in the college, completing the college, he was thinking whether to become a lawyer or something else. Then it seems that he has an experience of Christ. Then he asked him, "What shall I do, the Lord?" And then he said, "Can you become zero for me?" Zero means, kenosis, sacrifice. Then he said, yes. So his whole life was a kind of a kenosis. So he was the one who had that great vision, and then bought the land, around 30 acres of land. And from 63 to 1980, he built almost 30 buildings. 300 people can be accommodated in our campus. There is an auditorium. There is also a refectory. And then he also amalgamated with the beautiful trees from all over the place. So it is a place where the whole cosmos can come together. And in order to resemble that, I made a park which is known as Mindfulness Park, which in Sanskrit I call it as Vishwamitra Mandala. Vishwa means the whole cosmos, Mitra is friendliness, and Mandala is that the field in integrating Buddhist and all religious concepts. So this is a field where everybody can come, interact, and become friendly. We organize programs like last year, a few years, we were conducting on artificial intelligence and its impact on the society. We had Professor Andrew Briggs from Oxford University. Then we have also Dr. Dennis, Dr. Cowburn from the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge University. They came and they organized a series of lectures, 3-4 days of a camp on science and religion. And then we have also professors from Vladimir State University, Dr. Natalia Markova, Dr. Evgeny Arinin, then Maria Lyuteva, around 5 of the professors who came from here. And then we have conferences on religion and climate change. And we have such many number of programs we conduct. We have, since Corona, we have ABCD, that is Asian Buddhist Christian Dialogue. Then we have also now Hindu Christian Fellowship for Dialogue. So these are all 25 lectures every week we will have, and it runs into many months. So we have such programs, training programs also we conduct. Then also we rent out the place so that people can come stay here, and whether it be their own programs or they want to invite somebody else for their training. So that is the way we get some funds, so that we have around more than 50 staff members, and these staff members are taking care of the whole place. And for me, as the director, my assistant is from north, that is in Manipur. Northeast, that is from Manipur, is a different Christian. Then another from the Church of South India, who is also a musician, Reverend Sukumar. So we are a team who are working. There is also the executive committee. The chairman is the Marthoma Church, and from different Christian denominations. So we all work together for bringing together the humanity, for the progress of humanity, and to cultivate harmony. So these are, I could say that, some of the ideals and visions. And our founder is an activist, and I'm really writing on his theology. There are many books, but I was reading and going through all this Corona time. I will be writing a book with the title Semantic Epiphany. So that will be the title of the theological work on our founder, and also the 27 lectures after his death. Every year we used to have lectures from various, including scientists, politicians, lawyers, social activists. So we have all those are already printed. And then maybe I can just show another book. Just 1 second. Yeah, this is a book which I edited with someone else. So it is on. So you will be seeing it in a different way.
Not about contextual realism.
It is about contextual spirituality. One fantastic.
Another reality, another kind of reality.
Yes.
There are different realities. But by the way, some people, I think, doubt that ecumenical progress is even possible. Do you think, how to overcome, for example, the differences between Catholic Christians and Orthodox Christians? Do you think that politics or some other factors interfere here?
See, we have the division based on historical reality, doctrinal reality. So we are groomed into it, and I think transcending that, it will be a difficult process. But we can find similarities, we can find common elements, and also we can work together. So I believe more in the practical ecumenism. We call it as wider ecumenism, and I have given a few lectures on what is wider ecumenism. It is ecumenism, oikomene. So that is the Greek word you will be knowing. Managing our home. What is managing our home? Managing our home is in a way of interacting with everyone, what is useful and good for everyone. So instead of reflecting, arguing on doctrinal things, I think it will be best we will try to support the humanity with compassionate love. And that is what I have found. I have, from every religious traditions and every ecumenical places, I have found that it is possible that we can relate. And this practical ecumenism would be the best way. And then we can also ecology, climate change. These are all our common elements: illiteracy, poverty, disease. So those things, if you are emphasizing and we can work together, definitely that will help us to transcend our own barriers, boundaries, to become more humane. Then only we can become more Christian.
Yeah, good. Okay. So, by the way, some people think that the Orthodox religion is retrograde in comparison to Protestantism. For example, well, in Russia, for example, the well-known TV journalist Vladimir Posner thinks so. And some even think that it promotes despotism. What do you think about this? Well, I know your answer, but please.
Yes. I told you that, I have been into Greece and also the Mount Athos, which is one of the deepest Orthodox tradition. since I am a Catholic. I initially told them I am a Catholic. Then I found that, they are a little bit, they said that, you cannot do this or that. So that way I experienced myself. But I asked later what would be then I found that, in the Middle Ages and the later, there were many Latin Christians who came and killed their monks, drowned their monks, abbots. So that may be a historical way of, pain created. So that has to be reconciled. But in Xenophontos, another monastery there in Greece, Mount Athos. I thought that, that would be a place where, so I couldn't relate to him because he was speaking only Greek. So somebody was called by the abbot to translate igumen. Igumen called somebody, and then he translated that I am a Christian. So simply without anything, that abbot igumen hugged me. So I did not find any difficulty with there, but I also was there for the Pentecost day, and then I found so fascinating the liturgy. So maybe when people are criticizing, they will be may not be having the depth of knowledge from the shallowness. They will from their own particular perspective, they will be experiencing. I was also into many of the churches in Russia, participated in the monasteries, and in Belarus also you showed me, and then we went to many of the churches and even into the Catholic Church, and I found it is so fascinating how people are coming. It gives them meaning. And see, almost 75 years communism was prevalent, but I have seen in Russia many of these monasteries and the churches are filled up with the people. You cannot simply quench or rationally manipulate. It is deeply downtrodden and it will burst out sometime. That is what one of the experiences I said when I was a school boy in my church. One of our own my congregations priest, he came and preached that we should pray for Russia and Russia will become Christian again. And I was simply laughing at him. I was a boy only. That how it can be changed, how it will be possible. But in 2009, I was in Moscow, and the Archbishop, Catholic Archbishop of Moscow, was taking the Blessed Sacrament. More than 1,500 people. We were all in procession through the streets of Moscow. That is the Catholics. I never imagined that such a thing will happen. So I think God can change. God will be possible, and the cultures makes different, whether you are a Protestant, whether you are a Orthodox, whether you are a Catholic. But we have the ecumenical movements where everyone is interacting, coming together. So Pope Francis, you see that, how he is moving to different places and into Islamic countries, the Hindu countries, and he is bringing a way of good neighbor. So I think I follow that example of Pope Francis, and who is bringing every humanity into a togetherness, oneness, into the civilization of compassionate love.
Okay, thank you. So you have studied and lived in the West, traveled a lot, have been in Russia and Belarus. Where is the greater faith, or maybe more genuine faith, in the West or in the East?
That is again another difficult question. So
You're not obliged to answer.
So in the West, we say that, till the 18th, 19th centuries, they were sending missionaries to other places, and deeper ways of promoting, witnessing Christ. And then after Enlightenment onwards, we see that the changes, the Protestantism and everything. And I have seen in many churches, since I was also in US, in Europe, I was parish priest in several German churches. The participation of the people are much less. Maybe that the priests and the church itself failed to show them meaningful way of being a Christian. So maybe a hollowness entered into the leadership, and that was exhibited to the people. So they found there is no meaning. Maybe authoritarianism, pompous, rather than the serving mentality, all those things. But you see that what I have experienced in the East, see, after years of persecution, suffering, communism, atheism, there is an outburst for religious experience. I have seen many youngsters who are becoming monks in all these Belarus, Russia, Greece, and other places. That is the Orthodox places. And maybe the suppression showed them that the need of religion, the power of religion, and the search for meaning. So I think that is the way. So maybe rather than the West, now it is in the East, more search for. And I think also the Russian President Putin, he is standing his way as that, he's a good Christian. He's relating very closely with the Patriarch of Moscow. Then I think he visited Pope Francis. So that way he is behaving more of as a Christian leader, rather than in the West, there is the differences between the church and the state. They are political leaders, so therefore they don't want to mingle with that politics and religion. So that way I appreciate the Eastern tradition. And through Dostoevsky, I must say that the power of genuine faith, the faith in Christ, faith in the cross, the power of cross, ability to transform, which I found in Dostoevsky's Brothers of Karamazov, Crime and Punishment. So I really admire.
Okay, thank you. So I come back to physics. Professor Chandrankunal. For Werner Heisenberg, I refer again to a great physicist, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, we can say nothing about the atoms themselves, because predictions depend on the way we pose our experimental question. So it's no longer possible to make predictions without reference to the observer or the means of observation. To that extent, every physical process may be said to have objective and subjective features. Also, for Erwin Schrödinger, particles have the mode of existence of a rainbow. Schrödinger was inspired by Vedanta and Buddhism. Also, the French philosopher Michel Bitbol, and not only him, sees interesting connections between Buddhist philosophy and quantum mechanics. I think the immediate connection is established in the following question: do particles inherently exist? Likewise, I think in Buddhism, if I'm not mistaken, it's the problem of absence or presence of inherent properties and inherent existence of the bearer of the properties. What do you think about it? How would you answer to this question? What do you think about the connection between quantum physics and Buddhism, or maybe the other Eastern philosophies? If there is a connection, so maybe it's...
See, I think the question is really very difficult to answer. And it, from my perspective, I would say that quantum physics began in 1900 by almost 20 years of work of Max Planck. Then we have Einstein, then Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, de Broglie, then the great mathematicians, and then the interpretations. So this is a 20th century, and it is purely on matter. And there are questions which they could not explain, such as, yes, what is happening in the Hilbert space? So so we don't know exactly. And then it was said that Niels Bohr would say that, you get the results, and the results is really correct. So, and then what is happening in the collapse of the wave function? There is no one, even von Neumann, mathematician, he was trying to explain it, but there is no clarity in explanation from infinite possibilities to. And see, the Buddhism, what His Holiness Dalai Lama and the others are speaking about is more of the 4th century. There is Madhyamaka Buddhism by Nagarjuna. To tell you the fact that His Holiness Dalai Lama was chairing the session when I presented a paper on quantum mechanics and Madhyamaka Buddhism. So what I found is that the methodology of both Hinduism, both Buddhism and quantum mechanics is in search of truth, the search of wholeness, the search of meaning, and in that methodology we can find certain complementarities. Buddhism, in the Madhyamika Buddhism, it speaks about, emptiness itself is emptiness. There is no physical reality. Quantum mechanics, to some extent, we can say that you are splitting, and ultimately what you come, there is only energy. And then energy can be the least divisible element of energy is quantum. 6.63 into 10 to the power of minus 34 joules per second. So even there are scientists who are claiming that, these quarks, that is the ultimate. Quarks are made up of prions. Prions are made up of rishons. Rishons are made up of. So ultimately, where you limit, is it our own human constructions, or we are creating theories so that we can and fabricate instruments so that we can find these realities? But you should also see that in the practical applications, electrons, we have today computers and all other things. So the similarities between quantum mechanics and any Eastern philosophy or religion, especially Buddhism, I think it would be far-fetched. There are many who claims that, the similarities between Madhyamika Buddhism and quantum mechanics, they say the same thing. We have Fritjof Capra, I think in the 80s, who said that, the bootstrap theory can be explained by another mantra. I think we are confusing. The methodology of modern science is denied by many of these religious principles, because atomism, dividing, that gave us this quantum mechanics and other things. So we deny the methodology, but we accept the results, and basing on the results, we say that they are complementary. So there might be, to me, an inherent fallacy.
Okay, thank you. Professor Chandrankunul, there are different interpretations of quantum mechanics. And as I know, you prefer David Bohm's interpretation, which introduces hidden variables. So can you briefly summarize your understanding of this interpretation and explain why you prefer it?
Yes. David Bohm is the one who discovered Bohm-Arnav effect, Bohm-Cherenkov radiations, and he was also under Robert Oppenheimer in neutron radiations. So he was part of that Manhattan project. And unfortunately, at that time, they had McCarthyism, and he was expelled. And that was the time he discovered this hidden variable interpretation. Because in 1951, he was working on it. And Einstein, first he wrote a book on quantum mechanics in order to study. And he sent it to several authors. I mean, hardcore scientists like Niels Bohr, Einstein, and all the others. And only Einstein called him and told him the problems in quantum mechanics. As you know very well, he came up with the EPR thought experiment in order to show that quantum mechanics in its non-locality is violating the theory of relativity. Therefore, it is incomplete. So that incompleteness was his question. So, and then also God never plays dice. So that is again another. And then the complementarity that, particle and wave and depending upon the system. So there were many, and then indeterminism, the probability, all those things, Einstein, Schrodinger, Pauli, Planck, sorry, not Wolfgang Pauli. So many of those scientists had, but unfortunately they were not coming together in order to show a constructive way of developing an alternative. But Niels Bohr, under the leadership of Niels Bohr, Heisenberg, and then many other scientists, Pauli and the others, they were coming together. And then we also see that in order to counter the questions of Einstein, Niels Bohr was shown as a great philosopher, and all those issues were there. But David Bohm continued that pursuit in his hidden variable. And then EPR, he gave that the polarization or left or right changes. And then convincingly, he pursued. And then there was the mathematician who considered that there will not be another interpretation, and there is an interpretation in quantum mechanics. So one of these should be correct. John Stuart Bell, J.S. Bell, and in his books, Speakable and the Unspeakable, and then many others who he will be ridiculing Bohr and the others. And then he found that there is no different interpretation in quantum mechanics, only Copenhagen. I think it was by Heisenberg and von Neumann together in 1935. They have made that incompleteness theorem, that there will not be any. And then we have also this interpretation by David Bohm. So one of this should be wrong. That was J.S. Bell. Then J.S. Bell found that, both are right. What is that? That is, local interpretations are denied by this Heisenberg von Neumann theorem. Non-local, so David Bohm is a non-local one. And what he was proposing that there is a quantum potential. From Bohm-Arnav effect, we could see that, a solenoid will be splitting the light rays. This light rays, how it will be split? From a solenoid, there is nothing is coming out, only inside. But here, underneath, the light is split by. So he proposed that there is a quantum potential. So the Schrodinger wave equation, from that he is deriving a quantum potential and developing it into just like the electric potential and the magnetic potential, and there is this quantum potential, and this quantum potential is guiding the particle and the trajectories which were, so all those more mathematical developments were made once he came back to Birkbeck College in UK, and I closely associated with his assistant or associate, Dr. Basil Hiley, and he used to tell me how both of them were, how Basil Hiley has become a kind of a soundbox for David Bohm, and then just before his death in 1992, they wrote a book, not as hidden variable, but ontological interpretation. That means the real existence of a quantum potential and those things. So through this David Bohm's, which I call it as Bohmian mechanics, Bohmian mechanics is basically continuing the classical physics, relativity, and quantum mechanics. There is no indeterminism. It is possible, but the result. So my question was how three different theories on the same physical matter interpreting the reality, two theories as deterministic, one theory as indeterministic, and there are scientists who claim that it is because of the matrix mechanics. A into B is not equal to B into A. So instead of matrix, if we are using Clifford algebra and then other mathematical interpretations, it is possible that we can have a different way of determinate quantum mechanics. So but still I would say that David Bohm's interpretation needs to be better theoretically, experimentally proved, that there is no exact experimental proof for the interpretations of, but ultimately it gives almost the same predictions and the experimental results. So there is not a very specific experiment which is capable of giving a unique experimental result to validate Bohmian interpretation, but it gives a better meaning. So therefore it is better than the black box theory of Copenhagen interpretation, where Niels Bohr used to say that don't look into what is happening there, you get the result. And most of the scientists are really concerned and worried only about the results. But physics is not exactly, it is trying to understand the phenomena as according to Einstein. So I think that way. And then we also see that we cannot quantize relativity and we cannot relativize quantum. Still, that is the problem. We have string theory, superstring theory, H theory, M theory, so many theories, but we have very difficult to have this relativity and quantum mechanics to be fused. And I think maybe we need to have more physical concepts and somebody or a group of collective together when we have this the Big Bang and all, the cosmic singularity. So where we need to explain with a new physics, and there I hope that that new physics will enable us to find what is the new way of looking at the universe.
So, but do you think that quantum ecumenism is possible? There are different interpretations of quantum mechanics, or only David Bohm's interpretation. So,
well, see, most of the scientists are interested only in the Copenhagen interpretation, but many others, you see, Everett.
There is also Everett interpretation, Cubism, and so on.
There are too many interpretations. So that means, as you said, that Christianity divided into different groups. Quantum mechanics is also, each one is having. So see, infinite interpretations, infinite universes. So these are all, I think, a far-fetched way of.
Many world, many mind interpretation.
So all those things. Okay. But maybe these are. But whether some scientists say that you are wasting time on studying them, and you only need to. I think that is the reason why in many universities and all, no other interpretations is given, only the Copenhagen interpretation. But I think we should be able to give insights of these interpretations to young scientists, so that they can, in future, they can work on it, and they will be capable of flourishing new way of looking at the universe, new physical theories, rather than just like the horses, you are closed, narrow paths.
Is scientific truth is different from the religious truth, or there are two kinds of truth?
Well, I understand that you,
is there the religious truth?
I think that see, there is truth is only one, and scientific truth is also a subset of these ultimate truths. And as I say that Galileo, for him, doing science is truth, searching for truth, discovering truth, and understanding truth. So he was in the process of an artist. He is also searching for truth, and through his either realistic or cubist, or he is also expressing that truth. So truth is I think only one, and there are not many. And that truth, as Gandhi, our founder of our nation, father of our nation, who said that God is truth, truth is God. So the expressions of this truth is the different ways of. In German, there is a beautiful expression, Anknüpfungspunkte. So you might be knowing it, since you are in Darmstadt and you're knowing. So the points of contact. So all these, whether it is science, whether it is art, whether it is literature, whether it is culture, these are all points of contacts with the ultimate truth.
Okay, thank you. Father Matthew, what is the relation between religion and ethics, and religion and politics?
Well, religion and politics is very dangerous. So
do you think that philosophers, scientists, or priests should be out of politics?
Oh, well, we see that there is the Sakharov. You remember that, who was into this nuclear research and all, he found the problems. So he became a politician in a way to control all these destructive armaments. So scientists can become politicians for a greater cause. Because what is politics? It is developing the consciousness of the people, moving the masses. Often people say that, masses are asses. So you need to move them, and only a political brilliant mind can enable to lead them. So if scientists are capable of moving the masses, then they will be also losing that scientific pursuit. Often the scientists will be completely absorbed into their research. They don't want even to speak. So therefore, These are two contradictory pursuits, and those who are talented. Maybe see the German Bundeskanzler, the present.
Angela Merkel, yeah.
So who is she? A
Angela
physicist.
Merkel, German Chancellor, yeah.
Yeah, German,
She was
the
a physicist,
Bundeskanzler. She has
She had
a
been a physicist.
doctorate, and then see 18 years, and then how she was capable of leading not only Germany but the whole of Europe. I think she was so physicists can also become, scientists can also become political leaders, and then political leaders as or religion and politics. See, who is the founder of the European Union? There are three leaders: Konrad Adenauer from Germany, and there is General de Gaulle. See, they were all, both of them were Catholics, and then they also found that they were practicing Catholics, and then they found that the conflicts, and then see the steel and the coal industry, and that gradually developed. And then there is also Robert Schuman, and the Robert Schuman was instrumental in visualizing that we need to come together, and he was the foreign minister, and he was the European Parliament first president, and he is now in the process of being as a saint. That means religious people can also become political leaders, and these political leaders with the religious mind can bring together the humanity. This is what from Robert Schuman, General de Gaulle, and Adenauer, Bundeskanzler Adenauer, I see that. So great. And even I can say that in Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, so he is another Christian leader who was capable of driving that country into greater prosperity. So therefore, religion and politics can be capable of driving into greater harmony. Even this is our experience. Our father of the nation, the founder Mahatma Gandhi, ardent Hindu, but he appreciated, absorbed all the other religious traditions, and he showed that how to be a true secular person. It is not in as Europe said that secular means rejection of religion, religious values, but absorption and transformation, transmission of these religious values to the masses. That was Mahatma Gandhi has done, and that is how we gained. It is not through the bullets, and as Mao Zedong said, let there be revolution through the bullets, or so that is not the way, but peace and harmony is the way. And I think religion plays a great role in bringing together people, moving them to harmony, peace, prosperity, and progress.
Does religion promote democracy?
Most of the religion promote democracy, but there can also be dictatorships. So some religious leaders, they can become dictatorships, and then it all depends upon the mentality of the person who is the leader, and that leader utilizes. So we have see, in Europe you have the Machiavellian principles, and we have another person, Kaudilya or Chanakya's Arthashastra. That means how to conquer wealth. There is a book that is in the BC, Chandragupta Maurya. So that time of he was an empire. So there are one of my student who compared. So I used to teach them, and then I found that in manipulating the masses, the political leaders, so both of them are saying you should exhibit yourself as a religious leader, but you should not have any religious faith. You should be ruthless, and you should also never cater second rank leadership. So I think those who are politically following Machiavelli or Chanakya, whoever they are religious or they will follow only this political. They are the right and the might, and they should have power till the end. So that way, I think democracy is a place where consensus coming together and convincing through the logical rational processes. If somebody is not accepted, somebody's whims and fancies, then that will be autocratic, dictatorship, fascist, and it will not sustain for ages. It will collapse.
Okay, thank you. Professor Chandrankunal, what are your scientific, philosophical, or maybe organizational projects for the future?
Well, I can say that by the grace of God, I have been physicist. I have been also a philosopher. I am also a priest. I am also a psychologist and a journalist. So I think that, I found that, everything is so fascinating. And my present project is the study of consciousness. What is actually the consciousness? And I found that that is the place where everything can be filled in. My uncle, I told you, he was a hypnotherapist. He was a psychologist. I have seen that how he was healing these bipolar personality disorders, multiple personality disorders, and all other. I have seen it. And then from great masters from US, Sweden, Germany, India, I was capable of helping people from phobia, from neurosis, psychosis, and then the fascinating ways that suddenly they will be capable of changing psychoanalysis and all. It will be so. My present interest is how to transform the persons, and for that I have also a journal, and the name of the journal is International Journal for Transformation of Consciousness. How to develop tools. So maybe from the very beginning of the zygote or sperm fused with ovum, we have the embryo, and then the development, structuring the consciousness, and the structuring maybe till fifth year or sixth year of a child, and then after that it will be consolidated, and later we have to restructure the consciousness. So in order to restructure the consciousness, I made a tool which is known as quantum psycho religio therapy, QPRT. My uncle was the one who developed psycho-religio therapy. I added the scientific part to it. So therefore, QPRT is the tool by which I try to transform. And then I wanted to work together. There are a few other scientists working with me. Another student of mine, he has a doctorate in physics. He is researching for his doctorate on quantum consciousness. Another one who did his just defended his doctorate on post-phenomenology of dawn Ide. Another medical Dr. Navya, she's also a religious sister. She's also associated with me in studying this consciousness. And then another neurophysiologist who has already a doctorate in neurophysiology. from NIMCANS Bangalore. So we are in a collective way of understanding what is consciousness, and we want to expand it. I am also part of the California Institute of Consciousness Studies, and that is one of the largest consortium of psychologists, medical doctors, and other people who are pursuing what is consciousness. So the present target is studying the consciousness so that we are capable of transforming the consciousness. So from religion, science, philosophy, art, aesthetics, everything. I think I also invite you. We can all become into a
Very interesting,
consortium. Yes. So most welcome, Dr.
Yeah,
Francois.
I hope our cooperation will continue. Yeah. So, Professor Father Matthew Chandrankunal, thank you very much for this interview. It was my pleasure talking to you. I hope our cooperation will continue. All the best for your work and for you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Francois Igor Pris. The few days I stayed with you there in Minsk, and then you took me to different places, and the way we were interacting, and then going through different places, experiencing the beautiful landmarks in your country, and also I still remember the cry of the mothers. So there, in the Minsk square where that is there. So it was such a fascinating experience for me to live with you, and also the beautiful library, and then the Second World War museum. So these are some of the things which has pitched in my heart, and I am absolutely sure that we will continue our collaboration and our cooperation. And probably if I am there in Europe, definitely I will come to you again. And maybe next month I have a chance. I think the possibility that, then if possible, I would like to come interact with you. And I remember this Belarus Academy of Sciences, where the Institute of Philosophy is part of it. So this science, philosophy integration, that is something very important. And I appreciate very much our friendship and your invitation for me to come to your place. And I think this is something which will be spreading not only between us, our institutions, and maybe our cultures and our civilizations. Thank you so much. And thank you for interviewing me. It was a great experience. I never thought that I will say all those things, but I think you poked me and enabled me to come out with something substantial and something new. Thank you, Dr. Francois Igor Pris. Dankeschön. Alles Gute.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.